The almost single-handed effort by conservative Senator Jesse Helms to block the creation of a Martin Luther King Jr. national holiday today suffered two crushing defeats. Helms was stymied on the floor of the Senate, and in federal court, he was refused access to FBI files about the slain civil rights leader. But as Phil Jones reports, the bitterest part of the battle came in the Senate, where old wounds were reopened and there were new hurt feelings all around.
Senators paid little attention to the document that had been placed on their desk today from conservative Senator Jesse Helms, suggesting in Helms' words, a substantive working relationship between Dr. King and key elements of the Communist Party of the U.S. The vote was overwhelming 76-12 against a motion that would have in effect killed the bill. It was a bitter debate that clearly discouraged even some fellow Republicans.
The stale gossip and the unconfirmed rumors that Jesse Helms is talking about have no place in the debate over the founding of that holiday.
On the floor, Senator Kennedy accused Helms of using his late brothers as part of a smear campaign against King.
They regarded Martin Luther King's associates, many of them, as being communist. And they called in King and said, stop it. And he didn't stop it. So Mr. Kennedy's argument is not with Jesse Helms, it is with his dead brother John and his dead brother Robert.
These charges and allegations were made by arch segregationists in the early part of the 1960s to discredit the civil rights movement.
Lawyers for Helms were in court today requesting that FBI documents on King, sealed for 50 years, be opened. That request was denied, and one former Justice Department official who has seen the sealed documents discounted their relevancy.
There was nothing in the files, either in tapes or written records, that I saw that indicated that Martin Luther King was a communist or a communist sympathizer or in any way knowingly or negligently let himself be used by communists.
This has clearly turned into a sticky political problem for many senators. Some who had planned to vote against the holiday because it would be too costly to the economy now plan to vote for it tomorrow, claiming that Senator Helms has turned it into a racial issue. Phil Jones, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
The Senate today made it final. Phil Jones reports that slain civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. is now the only American besides George Washington to have a federal holiday to mark his birth.
The politicians clearly sensed the symbolism of the day. The vice president came to preside. The Republican majority leader made sure he was photographed meeting with Dr. King's widow. On the Senate floor, Mrs. King watched from the gallery as the Senate voted overwhelmingly 78-22, declaring the third Monday in January a holiday for the slain civil rights leader. It will start in 1986. Senator Helms, who had led the fight against the holiday, claimed there had been an atmosphere of harassment and intimidation, especially against Republicans.
Well, the intimidation was that you don't get any black vote.
But in the celebration that followed the vote, the emphasis was on unity.
Sorry it has taken 15 years to achieve this historic occasion.
If Martin Luther King Jr. were here with us today, and we could sing again that old song, we could sing, "We have overcome today."
The passage of this bill with strong bipartisan support has brought us much closer to the realization of Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream.
So now this bill is headed to the White House, and President Reagan says he will sign it. Phil Jones, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
President Reagan today met briefly at the White House with the widow of assassinated civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. Coretta Scott King was there to accept the proclamation President Reagan signed declaring Dr. King's birthday an official federal holiday for the first time next Monday. That was not Mrs. King's only stop in Washington. Also today, mounted on a pedestal of marble from Dr. King's native Georgia, a bronze bust of him was unveiled inside the U.S. Capitol Rotunda, joining the statues of other heroes of American history. The King statue unveiling taking place in the same rotunda where then President Johnson signed the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964. But
There we go. Keep moving that direction. There we go. first time you see like he comes here. Okay, all set.
Please be seated. And welcome to the White House. We're here today to honor a man who dedicated his life to the pursuit of a dream. In honoring one man's commitment, we're also rededicating ourselves to the fundamental principle behind that dream. That principle, which goes to the very essence of America, is simply this: that it is self-evident that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Today, we still cherish these rights and values upon which our country was built and for which our forefathers gave their lives, for which Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his life. The fight for genuine equality of opportunity goes on. It still continues for many Americans today, yet let us not ignore the strides that have been made and the great strides that are being made toward ending discrimination and bigotry in our towns and communities, in our government, and most important, in our own hearts. And there are many reasons for hope. Advancements in employment and education should not escape our attention. Black employment has risen 26% during our expansion. That's more than twice the rate of the job gain of whites. The unemployment rate for black youths has declined dramatically. Great strides are being made in education as well. The publication we released last spring, Schools That Work, describes many schools that are doing a good job educating disadvantaged children. One shining example is the Garrison Elementary School in the South Bronx in New York City. The student population is half black and half Hispanic. The school lies in one of the poorest sections of New York. Yet for the past 5 years, Garrison has ranked in the top 12% of New York City schools in reading achievement. By the time they reach the 6th grade, nearly every student performs at or above grade level in both reading and math. You know, James Madison once said, "A well-instructed people alone can be permanently a free people." And together we strive to ensure that every American receives a sound education and that in so doing we secure our freedom as well. Secretary of Education William Bennett has been leading the charge for higher standards and more discipline. We can give no better gift to our young people than giving them the basic skills needed to reach their potential and fulfill their dreams. The value of a good education was not lost on Dr. King. He entered Morehouse College at the age of 15 and earned a PhD 11 years later from Boston University. Martin Luther King Jr.'s own life was one of dreams. It's fitting that we honor the man who went from being a minister in the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta to being the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. Dr. King said the evening before his assassination, "I just want to do God's will, and He's allowed me to go to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man." These are the words of a man at peace with God and himself, content in the knowledge that what is right will inevitably triumph. He gave his life, as so many of our forefathers did, for his principles. And it is thanks to his strength of character and his God-given talents that the dream he spoke about so eloquently will live on forever. And now we'll sign the proclamation honoring the 59th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birth.
I'd like to ask you to stay in place for about 5 minutes.
About how far the nation has come in its willingness to grant a holiday to a black American, because we only have 2 Americans that have had holidays named for them, President George Washington and Martin Luther King Jr. The other unique feature about it was that Martin was not the head of the nation, but he was head of a nonviolent movement, and he was a clergyman. And I think it spoke well for the fact that people in America do champion morality, and they do champion the rightness of a great cause, and they support what Martin Luther King stood for, to the extent that there was a majority of representatives in the Congress and in the Senate who were willing to sign the legislation, to pass the legislation, and the president did sign it. So I think that gave a tremendous boost to many of the people in the local community areas, that Martin Luther King's birthday has been designated a holiday, and when the time came to celebrate it, they were very much involved in the celebration, and there were just so many activities at every level, and so many educational activities. So I think it becomes a very important learning experience to improve the relationships between and among racial and religious groups. And I look forward to this having a very important impact for the future in terms of what people can do together to realize greater fulfillment and
It would have been Martin Luther King Jr.'s 58th birthday. The assassinated civil rights leader now has a U.S. federal holiday to honor him. It will be observed officially Monday. Some people observed it today. 200 persons assembled at the Lincoln Memorial. In 1963, 200,000 were there to hear his dream of a society of racial equality and justice. But Dr. King's legacy is a legacy of actions, not just dreams. CBS News reporter Bill Whitaker looks tonight at how the King holiday itself is a case in point of the difference between dreaming a dream and working to make it reality.
Amid the scenes of birthday harmony run strains of discord. In Atlanta, where runners today completed a commemorative race from Selma, Alabama, Mrs. King has had a hard time getting businesses to sponsor a parade Monday. 40 states observe King's holiday, but there is still stiff resistance. In San Bernardino, California, the city council scrapped the holiday for city employees.
As far as Washington's birthday in Lincoln, we don't get that off, so it's just another birthday without a holiday.
In Arizona, Governor Evan Mecham rescinded the holiday.
I reacted to that which others had done, which I think was totally utilizing and pandering to the blacks, quite frankly.
Martin Luther King holiday is the most visible target. That's the easiest, most direct, most accessible means of expressing your hostility against black and against poor people.
The Justice Department reports acts of racial violence went up 42% last year. In the Howard Beach section of New York City, a black man is struck and killed by a car while fleeing a gang of whites. At the Citadel in South Carolina, the NAACP protests the harassment of a black student by white cadets dressed as Klansmen.
The fact is, it is plain old racism, and that exists in this country.
Black leaders say the racism that spawned the civil rights movement has been much reduced. Still, King's dream of an integrated society remains elusive. Today, by satellite hookup, President Reagan called on the nation's school children to fulfill the dream.
You should accept nothing less than making yours a generation free of bigotry, intolerance, and discrimination.
But many blacks say Mr. Reagan has turned the clock back on race relations.
The result is a national climate of selfishness and a failure of government to take a positive role in ending racism and disadvantage.
I don't think that anybody realistically can believe that this country is going to solve its racial problems during any of our lifetimes.
Perhaps not. But many Americans see the Martin Luther King holiday as a symbol of the struggle toward that goal. Bill Whitaker, CBS News, Atlanta.
And for CBS News, Dan Rather. Good night. Has moved from the street to the stage to the studio without losing its often angry message. It is a message that sometimes promotes violence against the powers that be, both real and imaginary. Regina Blakely reports tonight on the latest flap over rap.
What's a smiling face when the whole state's racist?
Racism and fighting it with violence. That's the message behind rap group Public Enemy's new video. By the Time I Get to Arizona targets that state for refusing to honor Martin Luther King's birthday. The revenge fantasy, which recreates King's assassination, shows rapper Chuck D leading an army, blowing up a fictional governor's car and poisoning a senator. The violent images are jarring to those who continue King's struggle for civil rights.
It doesn't honor Dr. King. It's antithetical to everything he stood for and preached.
This is Wolf's turn from Verde Valley. Go ahead on KTAR 620.
A Phoenix radio station has been flooded with calls from listeners reacting to the video. Although Arizonans have lived with controversy since former Governor Evan Mecham abolished the King holiday in 1987, the new video has renewed a deep anger that an entire state is being labeled racist.
And I'm flabbergasted. I'm not enthused about anybody trying to use Arizona as the GOAT, and to some degree myself, for their terrorist implications.
Ironically, Public Enemy has supported efforts to fight violence, but is using it this time to make a point, saying it's not important who finds the video offensive, but that it does offend.
Everybody has the right in this country to express their particular point of view. And that's what we're doing as a hardcore radical hip-hop group.
A radical video, perhaps, but an effective one. Public Enemy has reignited attention to Arizona's debate over a statewide holiday, which happens to be on that state's ballot in November. Regina Blakely, CBS News, New York.
Unsettling news from the street, part of our world tonight. We invite you to stay with this CBS station for the premiere later this evening of a new CBS News program, Street Stories.